In this case, a 10-year-old boy named Peter Smith claimed to have witnessed a murder when he was 6 years old. 4 years previous to the boy's disclosure, in May of 2002, a 29-year-old man named Max Spongello had been murdered near a neighborhood playground. At the time of the initial investigation, only one witness was found, a 45-year-old woman named Ella Farmer, who witnessed the event from her living room window about 200 yards away. Ms. Farmer reported that she heard arguing and looked out the window in time to see two men standing close to the playground. She then saw one of the men shoot the other man with a handgun. She heard 3 shots. The man who had been shot, Max Spongello, fell on the ground, and the other man ran off behind some nearby houses. She called 911, but by the time the police and EMTs arrived, the man was dead, and the assailant was nowhere to be found. The woman was unable to provide a detailed description of the assailant because she was so far away, but she reported that the man was Caucasian, of short stature, and wearing dark pants and a darkish shirt. Based on this brief description, the investigators were able to determine the identity of the murderer, and the case went unsolved for 4 years. Peter had lived in the neighborhood in which the murder occurred for all of his 10 years. Almost 4 years after the murder, in April of 2006, a detective visited Peter's elementary school to talk to children about violence in the schools and in the neighborhood. After the presentation, Peter approached the policeman and told him that he had something very important to tell him, and that he could help solve the murder of Max Spongello. Peter was taken to the local police station and interviewed. He reported that 4 years previously he had been playing on the neighborhood playground around sunset, although his parents had a rule that he was not to play on the playground in the evenings by himself. He claimed that while he was inside the playhouse on the playground, he heard some people approach the playground and then heard 2 young men arguing. As he peeked out of the window of the playhouse, he saw one of the men shoot the other with a gun. Scared, the boy remained as quiet as possible and hoped he was not found by the killer. Shortly thereafter, the killer jumped into a red car and sped off before anyone could come to investigate the noise. When Peter heard the car speed off, he jumped out of the playhouse and ran home as quickly as he could. Peter said he had recognized the killer, that he had seen him around his neighborhood several times, and he learned of the victim's name after the murder was publicized. He provided a very detailed description of the murderer, indicating that he was Hispanic, very tall and thin, had very short, dark hair, and was approximately 30 years of age. Peter also reported that the murderer was wearing a light-colored t-shirt. Based on Peter's description, the police arrested 35-year-old Mario McGinty, a drug dealer who used to live in Peter's neighborhood, but who had since moved to another part of the city. Peter identified McGinty in a lineup. When asked why he had not come forward earlier, Peter said that he was afraid to tell his parents that he had been on the playground because he was breaking their rule, and that he was also afraid that McGinty or his friends would harm him if he came forward. Peter claimed that he never told anyone what he had seen until he came forward 4 years later. It was also discovered that Peter walked past the scene of this crime, the playground, 5 days per week on his way to and from school. The case went to trial in December 2006. Peter was interviewed several times by prosecutors in the months following his initial disclosure. Each time his report became more elaborate and included more details. For example, during an interview 3 months after his initial disclosure in July of 2006, Peter indicated for the first time that he had heard some of the argument between Spongello and McGinty.
Welcome, y'all, tonight. I'm Nancy Grace, and we will be discussing this tragic case of little Peter Smith, who witnessed a murder. Tonight we have with us Sasha Fierce, and she will be discussing this case of the interviewer bias. Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, just so everyone's familiar, thanks for the invitation. First of all, pleasure to speak here. I'd like to familiarize everybody with what interviewer bias is. A lot of times, when individuals are interviewed in regards to a case, the interviewer has a tendency to project biases or word things and phrase things in ways that might affect the outcome of responses in a way, and can also question the credibility and accuracy of a person's recall.
I see what you're saying. And do you feel, pertaining to this case, that there are many issues or causes for concern regarding the manner in which Peter was interviewed?
You know, Nance, I'd have to say yes, definitely. Definitely, hands down. Hands down. You know, there are several instances where Peter was asked incredibly specific questions multiple times, and the amount or extent that this could have affected the actual responses and misconstrued is just, you know, incredible.
And would you say that these responses, these interview questions, now, were they specific? Were they suggestive, multiple questions?
Yes, 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 hands down to all of those.
Firm
Absolutely.
and aggressive?
Yes,
Against a young boy who did not know what was going on 4 years later. 4 years.
You know, Peter could have the potential to be incredibly swayed by the presence of the interviewer and the way that he structured and worded the questions.
And I'd like to go through just an excerpt here, just so viewers can get an idea of what this interviewer bias consisted of with poor little Peter, who was subjected to such strict and suggestive questioning. Would you like to lead us into that?
Sure. Okay. Well, right here I have an excerpt from the interview where, as you can see, Peter is being questioned. They're asked, what kind of shirt was Mr. McGinty wearing? Which Peter replies, I think it was a light shirt, but I'm not really sure now. The interviewer interjects, did it have blue or black on it? Peter, yes, that's it. It had blue checks on it. Are you sure it had checks, or was it solid blue? And Peter responds, yes, it was solid blue. This is a prime example of how specific questioning and very, very, you know, not a lot of room for spontaneous recall. It seemed like Peter was very cornered in the way that he responded.
I see.
Little to none options.
I see. And so you're saying that this could influence the outcome of this case.
Absolutely.
I see.
Definitely.
And I think that those prosecutors should feel very horrible for what they've done.
Unfortunately, you know, Nancy, it's altogether incredibly prevalent.
And quite alarming.
Yes.
It seems that Peter could have been easily cued or misguided or
Definitely.
felt an urge to respond to their questions with certain answers. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I have some pieces of research on here. One that was conducted by Baxter et al., and they had a study that included 8 participants, half of whom were interviewed in either a friendly or firm manner, and among the firm manner, it was narrow questions, specific, very aggressive in nature, and then the friendly ones were not, and they were being questioned about an accuracy of the story that they read, and the results found that those who were interviewed in a friendly manner actually had little to none errors in their responses, whereas those who were interviewed in a firm manner had a tendency to alter their initial responses to questions. So I definitely feel like this could be applicable in this case, definitely.
I do see where you're coming from. This is quite the point right there. And Ms. Sasha Fierce, I'd like to thank you so much for your input. Would you like to put any closing remarks on this case, or
You know,
tell me how you feel?
Unfortunately, as I said, before interviewing style can truly raise concern of the credibility of one's memory, as we saw in Peter's memory and interviews, there is abundance of specific suggested questions that provide little to no options for responses. So, it's not to say that, you know, altogether Peter's testimony is completely discredible, but it raises some concern over too.
I do see that, and I do hope that those prosecutors and the jury will take this into effect if it does still happen to go to court. And I'd really like to thank you. I know you have a busy schedule, and we have to squeeze you in. Sasha Fierce.
Thank you.
Right now we're going to cut to a commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to hear more about this tragic Spongello case. We'll be back with Bertha Livingston, who is actually an expert on post-event information. She will give us a little more insight into this tragic situation.